the gap, standing for Jesus, standing in the gap for family and friends, standing in the gap, one love for all, so we all can make it in.
I had mentioned earlier, I stumbled through it, but I had mentioned the Gap News, and the Gap News is basically a segment of our broadcast that we dedicate to current events. And the reason we do that is because Jesus left us with the Great Commission. And the Great Commission says, spread the gospel throughout the world. And we have to understand what's going on in the world to be able to spread it out through the world. A lot of people want to say, well, that worked back in 2000. Well, it worked, 2,000 years ago. It'll work the same today. And it's called the Gap News, and Marvel's in charge of the Gap News. I don't know what she has, but she gets it all from the news, and there's always something going on. So, Marvel, what you got?
So last week, we talked about Pope Francis, and he was going to be funeralized. Actually, by the time we got on the air, his funeral had already happened, but we didn't have any news about it yet because they're so far ahead of us on 6 hours ahead of us on time. But I did want to share with you all what happened after and during the funeral, and then what happened this week. Y'all, nobody could make it up.
Well, folks, after J.D. Vance killed the Pope and then got memed to hell, and then MAGA quote-unquote Christians celebrated the Pope's passing like the blasphemous Beelzebubs they are, it seems like today, in this breaking and humiliating story, that Pope Francis might have gotten some divine retribution from up on high while humiliating Trump in front of millions of people at his funeral at St. Peter's Basilica today.
Faced with the raging wars of recent years, with their inhuman horrors and countless deaths and destruction, Pope Francis incessantly raised his voice, imploring peace and calling for reason and inviting honest negotiation to find possible solutions. Because war, as he said, results in the death of people and the destruction of homes, hospitals, and schools. War always leaves the world worse than it was before. It is always a painful and tragic defeat for everyone. Build bridges, not walls, was an exhortation he repeated many times, and his service of faith as successor of the Apostle Peter was always linked to the service of humanity in all its dimensions. Spiritually united with all of Christianity, we are here in large numbers to pray for Pope Francis, that God may welcome him into the immensity of his love.
Well, folks, after J.D. Vance killed the Pope and then got memed to hell, and then MAGA quote-unquote Christians celebrated the Pope's passing like the blasphemous Beelzebubs they are, it seems like today, in this breaking and humiliating story, that Pope Francis might have gotten some divine retribution from up on high while humiliating Trump in front of millions of people at his funeral at St. Peter's Basilica today.
Faced with the raging wars of recent years, with their inhuman horrors and countless deaths and destruction, Pope Francis incessantly raised his voice, imploring peace and calling for reason and inviting honest negotiation to find possible solutions. Because war, as he said, results in the death of people and the destruction of homes, hospitals, and schools. War always leaves the world worse than it was before. It is always a painful and tragic defeat for everyone. Build bridges, not walls, was an exhortation he repeated many times, and his service of faith as successor of the Apostle Peter was always linked to the service of humanity in all its dimensions. Spiritually united with all of Christianity, we are here in large numbers to pray for Pope Francis, that God may welcome him into the immensity of his love.
Good evening, I'm Lawrence O'Donnell, and welcome to the next 100 days. It was a very bad day in the presidency of Donald Trump. Donald Trump had to get rid of the first big player in this White House that he has had to get rid of. That was today. And today, a federal judge appointed by Donald Trump ruled against Donald Trump. It's a turning point. We are at a turning point. Donnie Two Dolls arrived at what might be the most memorable turning point in his presidency when he himself expressed the damage his tariffs are doing in terms that any child in America could understand, especially a girl hoping for a Barbie for Christmas. What Donald Trump said about that yesterday became the lead story on this program last night. and went viral today. And today, Donnie Two Dolls used the furor created by the stupidest thing ever said about Christmas by a president of any country to mask the first firing in the second Trump White House yesterday.
Somebody said, oh, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, you know? And maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
After I made the Donald Trump's $2 theory of Christmas the lead story on this program last night, called him Donnie Two Dolls, to both prove the intellectual rot of the Trump tariff scheme and how Donald Trump is now pushing voters away from him, pushing supporters away from him with Scrooge-like comments. Donald Trump's favorite hometown newspaper, the New York Post, the newspaper owned by Donald Trump's billionaire friend Rupert Murdoch, the newspaper that has always treated Donald Trump favorably as a gossip item before he got into politics, agreed with me that the Two Dolls was the most important thing Donald Trump said yesterday, and Donnie Two Dolls woke up to find this as the cover of today's New York Post. Skimp on the Barbie. Trump admits tariffs will raise prices, cause shortages. It's that simple. There's one from Manhattan today. Protesters out there against Donald Trump. Others from other places in the country today dumped Donnie Two Dolls. It really moved because it is so easy to understand. It is just so simple. And so Donald Trump chose today to make the biggest change in the White House staff since Inauguration Day, hoping that the disaster at the core of that story about Donnie Two Dolls could be muted. He might be able to mute the story that he was creating for himself today. Today, Mike Waltz set a record for Donald Trump's first choice for National Security Advisor. Mike Waltz made it all the way to the 101st day of the Trump presidency before being removed from that position. The man who says he always chooses the right people, the best people, got rid of his National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, on the 101st day of service, which means that Mike Waltz served 4 times as long as Donald Trump's first choice of National Security Advisor in the first Trump White House. Michael Flynn served 22 days as National Security Advisor in Donald Trump's first White House before Donald Trump fired him and before Michael Flynn then went on to become a convicted criminal who Donald Trump then pardoned. Mike Waltz was removed from that job after organizing a group chat that included the CIA director, the director of national intelligence, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and others to make sure that everyone was informed, and in some cases over-informed, about an air attack that the United States was about to launch in Yemen. One of the people Mike Waltz included in that group chat, not on secure technology, was the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, who wrote all about it, exposing the single biggest security breach by a national security advisor in history. It is so simple. High school kids will have no problem understanding how stupid and incompetent you have to be to have your group chat leak publicly. The Trump presidency is sinking. The cruelty will continue. He will continue to try to deport children who are American citizens. He will continue to try to imprison in El Salvador people who have committed no crimes. He will publicly revel in his cruelty to people for whom Trump voters have shown very little sympathy. That will continue. But so much of the rest of what Donald Trump is trying to do is sinking. The Trump voters who have showed up at rallies, which is a very tiny percentage of Trump voters, have always shown sympathy for themselves. They have always shared in Donald Trump's self-pity when Donald Trump would stand at his rallies and whine and complain about how badly he has been treated after he arrived at that rally on his private plane, whose fuel and maintenance was paid for by their campaign contributions. Donald Trump knows how to feel sorry for himself. He's very good at that. And the people at Trump rallies who spoke to reporters, seemed to be very good at that too. But remember, about 99% of Trump voters have never been to a Trump rally. Donald Trump does enjoy sounding cruel. Donald Trump enjoys sounding threatening. Donald Trump wants to scare his opponents, and he wants to scare any of his political allies in the Republican Party who might ever think of disagreeing with him. The cruelty is not an act. It is one of Donald Trump's genuine, deeply held qualities. It takes unspeakable cruelty for a president of the United States to take the food away from starving children in Africa in the middle of a famine, as Donald Trump and Elon Musk have done. Donald Trump took food away from starving mothers in famine in Sudan, from grandmothers, from grandfathers, hungry children watching their siblings starve to death because of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump decided they don't need any more food from us, even though the United States of America, for the entirety of Donald Trump's life and before that, has produced much more food than we can consume in this country. The farmers who produced that food that the United States Agency for International Development was using to feed starving children in Africa were all paid in full for that food. The federal government paid American farmers for that food that the American government then delivered to starving children, and it was as tiny a budget item as exists in the federal government. And only the cold cruelty of Donald Trump could take that food away. No other president ever contemplated such a thing. No matter how negatively someone might think of the overall record of Republican President George W. Bush, he was as caring and kind and, yes, Christian as any president has ever been. When the most behaviorally and philosophically unchristian president in history today at the White House, after becoming Donnie Two Dolls yesterday, participated in a national day of prayer without ever having been able to publicly recite a prayer in his life from memory. Donald Trump embodies cruelty, not Christianity. Donald Trump cannot hide the cruelty and cannot control the cruelty. And that is why, when he was asked about the fact that 80% of the toys sold in this country come from China and 90% of all Christmas products come from China, Donald Trump couldn't find words that it would express any sympathy for anyone, for any child who might not get that toy that they were dreaming about on Christmas Day because of Donald Trump. So Donnie Two Dolls said, well, maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls, you know? That's the sound of a cruel billionaire. That's the sound of someone rich enough to think that 30 dolls under the tree is a common experience for children in America. And that's a billionaire mean enough to think that everyone should just calm down and follow his advice at how many dolls should be under a Christmas tree. But Donnie Two Dolls' breathtakingly cold statement about the children of America is the clearest thing he has said to Americans and to Trump supporters about how lost he is, about how incapable he is of serving the needs of anyone in America, including children, who can now understand how stupid and incompetent their president is, including children who came out to support Donald Trump during the presidential campaign. This is the campaign interview that deserves to be seen by every American of every age.
What do you want him to do? What do you want him to say today?
I want him to lower prices and lower the taxes and make Barbies cheaper.
Make Barbies cheaper?
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. Have they gotten expensive?
Yeah, and Polly Pockets. All my favorite toys are so expensive.
You know, you go from a person going to the leader of the Catholic world, going to his funeral, first of all, disrespecting the dress code, and then behaving so boorish, you know, chewing gum, playing on your phone, falling asleep, and he was actually ridiculed across the world for his behavior at the funeral. But then he comes home and he does this. You know, maybe okay, the tariffs are going to be bad, so maybe the kids don't need to get any toys. You know, I don't know what to say, honey. What do you say?
More the same with him. I mean, he had a world stage and he took advantage of it. He was different than all the rest of them up there. He likes to be different in a blue suit and all that, and he has no compassion for what ordinary people go through. So, he's pushing his own agenda, regardless of the effect on anybody. So,
I just saw this on Facebook. I'm gonna just share it with y'all. Can you see that? This is from Trump's Truth Social in the White House. This just came out today. So, I mean, the depths to which he will go, no bounds. No bounds. So, here we are. I hope everybody was able to rejoin us. I'm sorry our network dropped, and so we had to restart up the broadcast, but I hope everybody's been able to come back on with us. So we're going to go on. I guess that's all we got for the Gap News, huh?
alrighty, Gap News, current events, the Great Commission.